To all of you self-proclaimed watch geeks out there, how good are you when it comes to knowledge about watches and the world of horology? Consider this a challenge, because today we're going to find out. Welcome to What's the Watch, or Watch Riddles. I'm still kind of working on the title here. But the short version is that I had this idea for a game, and I thought it'd be fun to try out with all of you. So how this is going to work is that I'm going to have a particular watch in mind. I'm going to present you with some basic specs and then some hints related to that watch. And your job is to guess what that watch is or what that watch family is. The hints here could be visual, they could have something to do with the watch itself or the brand, or even be some sort of historical or pop cultural reference that's related to the watch. And while I may show you a specific colorway, you don't need to be that specific. As long as you narrow it down to the same model or family of models, you're good. Today, I'm going to give you hints for 5 different watches, and then at the very end, I'll tell you the answers. And since I'm not really going to pause in between each watch, feel free to pause the video if you want to think about it, maybe go do some research. Whatever you want to do, feel free. I'll still be here when you get back. So let's start off with something a little easier. And for this one, I'm just going to call it the Kalidescope for right now. This is a Japanese-made watch with a Japanese automatic movement. It's got a 41-hour power reserve, 50 meters of water resistance, and a 40.5mm wide case, with the current MSRP around $495 US. This line of watches originally started as a JDM exclusive, but it became such a hit that eventually the brand expanded it worldwide, as well as expanded the lineup with a vengeance. There are a lot of new models in this collection, and that does include a few smaller versions. But whatever one you look at, they're all known by the same name of the collection. It's also a watch that's, while praised, is often criticized for its size, as it tends to break with tradition for its style. And the last hint I'll give you is that it's 5 o'clock somewhere. Moving on to number 2, and for this watch, we're going to call it the King. Spec-wise, this is a Swiss-made watch with a Swiss movement. It also comes in a variety of sizes, as well as there's an automatic, quartz, and quartz chrono versions available. Although, historically speaking, the most famous incarnation of this watch had a very different kind of movement. It wasn't quartz, and it wasn't quite automatic. And it's a movement that's no longer in use. This is one that may also be a little difficult to put into any particular category. But despite only having 50 meters of water resistance, I'd still say it's more of a casual watch than a dress. Also, while the current incarnations of this watch are Swiss-made, its roots and history are deeply entrenched in America, including parts of its musical, cinematic, and even television history. And lastly, the key shape is a bit unusual, being very asymmetrical. It was unusual when it was introduced, and it's still very odd today. It's almost sci-fi-ish. In fact, you could even say that it's mandatory equipment when you're dealing with aliens. Moving on to number 3, and this one may be a little hard if you don't follow microbrands. But for this one, we're going to call it the Cult Leader. This is a Singaporean microbrand with a very unusual Swiss movement. In fact, this may be one of the first uses of this movement, which combines a beat rate of 28,800 beats per hour with a 68-hour power reserve. It's a steel watch with 200 meters of water resistance and an MSRP around $750 US. This aquatically named watch was designed to be kind of an upgraded version from an older model, which is also aquatically named. And lastly, this is a watch that you can't currently buy because it's sold out. And for the brand, that's not an unusual thing. Number 4, and we're going to call this one second place. The modern version of this watch is from a Japanese-owned brand and does feature a quartz chronograph. It's 45 millimeters wide with 50 meters of water resistance, as well as an MSRP starting around $625 US. It all depends if you want a bracelet or some sort of strap. Also, despite the brand's current ownership, its roots are also deeply American, just like the second watch we talked about, although it's a completely different company. But this particular brand was actually on the cutting edge of technology in the United States for a long time, even working with a few well-known government organizations. And I should mention that while this watch is a quartz chronograph, that quartz crystal is running at a frequency a bit higher than usual. And lastly, well, let's say that the eagle has landed. Number 5, And this one may be a little bit harder. We're going to call this one the Explorer. Although it's probably not the Explorer you're thinking of. This is a Swiss-made watch with a Swiss automatic movement. It has a stainless steel case, 80-hour power reserve, 200 meters of water resistance, and an MSRP of at least $2,000. Although there are some versions that are double that. I should also point out that there are a few different sizes, as well as I think there is a chrono version as well. But when it comes down to it, I think the 37 and 42mm automatic versions are the most popular. Also, while the watch's roots date back to the 1960s, the modern reinterpretations have only been around since 2017. And along the same lines, that until this reinterpretation, this isn't a brand you typically associate with a dive watch. And lastly, let's just say, anchors away. So that's all 5, which means it's now time to move on to the answers. And if you haven't guessed this already, this is your last chance to pause the video if you're not ready. But moving on and starting at number 1, the Kalidescope. And for this one, we have the Seiko Cocktail Time lineup of watches. Although the specific one I was showing you is the Blue Moon version. And I think the major giveaway here is just showing you part of this dial. There isn't much out there like it. Now for number 2, the King, it's not a Hamilton Khaki King, but we are still talking about a Hamilton. It's actually the Hamilton Ventura lineup of watches, which were known to be a favorite of Elvis's. Rod Sterling was known to wear one occasionally, and more recently they've been incorporated into the Men in Black films. And if you didn't know it, the original version utilizes this really odd electric movement. It wasn't quartz, but it still was battery powered. Number 3, the Cult Leader. And when you're talking about micro brands and cult watches that always sell out, your first thought should be to Zelos. And the only Zelos that I know of that uses that high beat 68-hour LJP G100 movement is the Spearfish. And so far, it's the only watch I've heard of that's used it. Number 4, second place. And when you're talking about the greatest races of the 20th century, you gotta talk about the space race. And more specific, the race to the moon. And in terms of moon watches, the Bulova Lunar Pilot is the one that came in second place. Bulova worked with NASA and they gave them some prototypes, but eventually they lost out to the more famous Omega Speedmaster. Now, I think it was on Apollo 15 they did bring up one of those prototypes, so I guess you could call that a consolation prize. Number 5, the Explorer. And as a side note, this is actually the watch that gave me this whole idea. You see, I got this email from Watch Gang and it was trying to sell me on their high-end Centium Watch Club package. It didn't really tell me what the watches they were trying to sell me, but it did show me some basic specs. And I spent way too long trying to figure out what Swiss-made watch had an 80-hour power reserve and cost at least $3,000. Eventually, I kind of narrowed it down, but it gave me the idea that this might be kind of a fun game to try with all of you. Anyway, I gave you a few more hints than I had, but eventually I settled on that watch being some form of a Radow Captain Cook, which was named after the famed British explorer, and it's famous for its swinging anchor on the dial. And with that, we're done. As usual, let me know down below what you thought about this video and how many answers you got correct, as well as if you thought the hints were too easy or too hard. If enough people enjoyed this, I'll work up another one sometime. And as usual, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.